necessarily about, we did talk to me about Baltimore, but Jim was in some ways really prophetic. So his concern, I was sitting, I'm sure I was there too, when President Obama was first elected. He was completely surprised by it, really pleased, and then very concerned of what it would portend for the discussion of race and class in America. He always thought that folks would get nervous and kind of, or let the notion subside because we've now elected a black president. And I watched all of the events, starting coming back from Trayvon all the way to Long Island, etc. Many of them with him, and he would say, "See, people have stopped listening." And then the other thing I'd say that we used to talk about a lot, and it's been ingrained in me, Jim had very specific demands of the black middle class in particular. He thought that we had a certain burden and responsibility, not only to do well, but to take those things and give them back to the communities that we knew, that our families still lived in, that they were still suffering through. And when he didn't see that, he would challenge you very, very directly. So if it wasn't just about you being successful, or just about you getting a new promotion, or just about you graduating with a professional degree, his constant retort was, are you going to get off your duff and do something other than enjoy the fruits of your labor? And that has stuck with me in just about everything I've done going forward.
I have to echo what Tony has just said. Jim was my first cousin, and I'm the youngest. He was the most senior. And he always said we have a responsibility, not just to ourselves, but to our community, regardless of who's in that community, because we're all in it to be successful and to move forward. That's the only way we're going to survive as people.
Looking at the presentation, Voices of Elders, I got goosebumps because my own grandfather, served in World War II and talked about being on the Red Ball Express and how when he returned home, the GI Bill got him his housing in D.C. and his first government job. Can you give us just some reflections on what Jim may have thought about returning from World War II, the GI Bill, and what we can do today to implement that same type of social change? Because I think for African Americans, that return after World War II was one of the big social changes of the 20th century, probably for African Americans. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Let me kind of start that. One of my conversations with Jim was that I had an uncle who was a Tuskegee Airman. And so Jim and I had a lot of conversations about that, and as you saw in the piece, he wasn't able to participate with that group. But then I had another uncle who he knew in the Korean War. So it's interesting how our paths intertwined over the years. But I think Jim would have seen this as just another challenge. And would embrace this whole notion of advancing yourself and taking advantage of opportunities as they present themselves. That it's your responsibility to do that. He was. You could tell by the presentation, Jim did not hold back. He did not hold punches. He spoke his mind. And he was very adamant and very definite about the relationships between African Americans and the overall community. And he certainly had a vision, and that vision, I think, was reflected in many of the endeavors he pursued in Wilmington, Delaware. And finally, Mr. G was a gentleman in Delaware, Wilmington, Delaware, but there are Mr. G's throughout this country that are doing things very similar, very nondescript, no high accolades. You don't read about them every day in the paper, although you do read about them. But he was not a pompous person. I did not know his political connections necessarily until he would give me little hints that he knew people. But again, the Jim Gilliams, there are hundreds and thousands of them across this country in various communities.
I have a question regarding the role that he played in the riots in Wilmington. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I think the film touched on it, but it didn't give us more of the, I would like more of the background.
Yeah, so on the heels of Reverend Martin Luther King's assassination, there were riots all over the country, particularly in urban centers, as you know. But I believe Wilmington was the only one where the National Guard was called upon to occupy the city. And I think that's one, if not the only time that has happened in our nation's history. So Wilmington was at the forefront in that regard. And as a result, people had curfews, and it didn't matter what age you were. It was mostly focused on African Americans. And the Governor Peterson, which you saw in the first video, gave out about, I think it was 10 cards to folks who he thought could calm the peace, could go in the community, talk to folks, and bring back information that the political leaders needed, to make key decisions. Jim was literally in Delaware for 3 years. He had just been in Delaware 3. He came in 1965. He was one of those 10 people. And I'm not sure in the first video, you might have, I think there's a picture of the card that he has kept that entire time. And I happen to know 3 other folks who are no longer with us that also kept that card. So just the force who he was just comes through in the fact that he comes to the community. 3 years later, he's one of the most recognized, important members of that community at one of the nation's most significant moments.
First of all, I think that your presentations were amazing, just simply outstanding. The article you're writing was beautiful. It really did encompass everything. I think the amazing thing about his life is the type of person that he was, and the fact that oftentimes within our world we don't see all of the amazing African American men who are doing amazing things. So that's one reason why I think this is great, and I think we need to see more of it. Were there discussions about what we can do as a country and as a world to recognize that there are millions and millions of amazing, positive African American men in our world? I mean, what can we do as the masses? Because all we see is what we all see on television. You know, every male is a thug, or he's uneducated, or he's doing horrible things. But we live our lives every day as African Americans. I'm the mother of three sons, and we all know that that's not our world at all. There are negatives in every society, in every culture, in every group of people. So what do we do, all of us, to make sure that what we're seeing and hearing represents us, not what someone decides to put on television?
It's a great question, and this might not answer it directly, but Jim, my oldest son's 23, and he's graduating from Syracuse this year, and Jim knew him since he was a little boy, and as he got older, I would take him out to spend some time with Cat from time to time. And I actually think that, and Cranston mentioned this, there are so many elders in our community who have these stories within them, but aren't often asked to tell those stories. And case in point, Jim was my best friend. I didn't hear those stories. I did not hear the voice of elder stories. We just didn't talk about it. And someone Shirley probably knows this. Shirley probably because he didn't want to talk about it at some point. But when AJ would come, my son's name is AJ, when AJ would come, you would see both their faces light up, because he would start imparting wisdom that literally was coming through in a very small way in the history books my son was reading. So, he would say, so tell me about the civil rights movement. And I remember one distinct conversation where Jim says, I'm in a hotel in Baltimore. I'm talking to a group of leaders, some of which you all would know. And then he goes on and says, we're thinking about starting this movement, doing this thing in D.C. And my son says, Mr. G, are you talking about the March on Washington? He said, yeah. He said, you were in the room talking to the organizers to March on Washington? He was like, yes. So that kind of import is going to have a significant impact on my son's life and what he chooses to do outside his professional career. To me, it comes back to what Jim wanted for all of us. Be successful in whatever endeavor you choose, but you have to have a sense of the burden of the responsibility to give back as you have been given to.
And just to piggyback on what Tony's just said, I think forums like this, where you inform just maybe a handful of people, and those people take that message to others, and you let a community and then a whole mountain of people know that, hey, there are certain people that, hey, they're not stars, but they're regular people who really think and care about the community. I think this kind of forum is the way you project this image of people who have done important things, not because it was the nicest thing in the world to do, but just because they believe in one another.
I think the Voices of Elders is a tremendous undertaking. And I did a little, I was so impressed with it, I did try to do a little research to see, are there other communities that have adopted this, and there are not. And so, I think that, if anything, if I get an opportunity, I'm going to talk about that. I think it is a way. And then there are other strategies to take, I think, within our educational system, how we introduce information about who the Americans are and how diverse and the contributions that were made. Tremendous piece on Jim's war experience and how he was a hero. There is a piece about the Senator Coon who did a tribute on the Senate floor after Jim's death, and Jim was highly decorated. He had 2 Bronze Stars and several other medals. And so there are those little vignettes, stories that need to be told about individuals throughout our community, along with the rest of our populations, Native Americans, all those who contribute to this country.
I think
you had your hand raised before I did.
Oh, I'm
You want to
sorry.
ask your question? Okay, go ahead.
No.
You sure? Yeah, I'm reformulating that.
Oh my goodness, I don't know if we want to wait for that.
I remember there was a line in the film where someone was quoting Mr. Gilliam said, like, dead warriors don't win any wars.
Yeah,
so I was wondering, has there been a particular war, whether it's Mr. Gilliam tried to accomplish, or for himself, or for a community that he lost, and went kind of like, I wish I could have won that one. Is there any particular one that you recall that something he had tried to do and he actually didn't accomplish? Or didn't work out?
Something he tried to do that he didn't accomplish.
Either regarding his life or regarding what he tried to do within his community, whether it was a task or a goal or something that actually didn't work out the way he wanted it to go, and it kind of really stuck in his craws a little bit.
Yeah, except that the ending is a good news story. So you'll remember that in the video, he talked about him getting affiliated with the Baltimore Urban League in the 60s. And then he was on the board of the National Urban League in the 70s. And then it took him 25 years to start the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League. There were lots of fits and starts along the way. And he had to retire. And at 78, and he was probably retired 5 years by that time or so, right? He and I came down to D.C. for something for Nelson Mandela. I was working for Joe Biden at the time. I didn't know him very well, but I was just amazed that I was going to spend the day with Joe Gilliam. So he wrote down and he started telling me his vision and how his vision had been something he had wanted to do since the 70s. By the time we got back from that trip. So we came down to DC, did something with the senator, Nelson Mandela, got back on the train. By the time we got back to Wilmington, which in those days was about an hour and a half, two-hour ride, I had already decided that whatever he wanted me to do to help start the Urban League, I was going to do. 6 months later, I'm in New York with Jim Gilliam making the case for why the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League should be formed. 6 months after that, Jim Gilliam raised $1 million to start the Urban League and asked me to be its first president. So at 79, he realized the vision for something he didn't think was going to happen over the last 25 years. And that was kind of who he was. He never kind of, and Shirley knows this too, Cranston does, he just never stopped moving on a particular mission. So whether it was something that happened in the 60s that he wanted to happen now, or was the Urban League, he just never stopped moving on it. And as a result, lots of things materialized. I often say that Jim's never an elected official. He was a long-time government employee in Newcastle County, but was not like a cabinet secretary or any of those kind of things. And the difference he made from the positions he had was tremendous. So when he founded the Urban League, that was the first time it was his. The first time that something like that was really his. And we grew the organization pretty significantly in a very, very short time.
And I have to say, I watched this. Here I am, I'm the younger one with Jim, and I'm listening to him as, while I'm growing up and trying to do things, and I'm telling you, there was no stopping him. Once he had his mind made up that a thing needed to be, he would maybe deviate a little, and I do mean a little, to accommodate certain things, but his determination was so strong and so positive. That's the thing. It was just so positive the whole time that he was developing ideas, and especially the Urban League, because I remember that. We'd be on the phone, and I'd say, Jim, where's it at this time? He said, Shirley, I almost have all the dollars. I almost have it all. And I go, wow, okay. And then telephone hangs up, and just a short while later, it's ready to happen, Shirley. And around that time, I met you. And he has just been absolutely amazing. And if I sit up here like I'm in awe of my cousin, yes, I was. Absolutely. I had a brother who was much like him, who was taken early. That was Emmanuel and him. And because of these two men in my life, it made all the difference in the choices that I made. I knew I had to do things a certain way, and it could not be wrong.
I think if we were to look at something that Jim would be disappointed in our conversations over the years, was the loss of his son. His son died at an early age. And Jim had such great relationships with Jim Jr. I mean, they were partners. And I think he had probably, not that he shared any of this with me, but I do believe he had ideas about how they were going to do great things in the community that they served. Jim Jr. was a very successful businessman and was the spearhead behind the creation of the Performing Arts Center at Morgan State, and which was named after Jim and Louise Gilliam. Jim was a very strong family man. Many of our conversations were about family and that relationship and the responsibility of fatherhood. You heard him speak of his father, that he had particular feelings about it, but he respected him and he understood the dynamics that were going on there. But I think if there was going to be a regret, it would be about that inability to create something new and dynamic, because Jim Jr. was in that same, cut from that same cloth. And it would have been interesting to see, no doubt about it.
I really want to thank you all for coming and talking and sharing your memories with us this afternoon. I'm sure it is not easy given that the loss was so recent. But what I see is between the film and hearing you speak about him, how powerful that is for us. There was a quote that his mother said about that I've never heard before, but has such meaning for my past and my future, and that was, when you see something wrong, act like it. And I've been looking for something to express that thought for a very long time, and so I'm very happy about it. I would like to know about, I didn't realize his involvement with the criminal justice system, and we had a wonderful conference here at the AO put on by our public defender's office this year, and it addressed the issue of race and the criminal justice system, and how there are so many, especially African American men, young men, who are in our federal prisons, especially for nonviolent drug-related offenses, and how it's created a whole multitude of problems. And I wonder if he spoke about that at all, or what he might have said.
Well, we probably did have some conversations about that, and I'm well aware of what's going on in the world today. And when I was asked to do this, I really thought hard on, what did we talk about this at all? The only thing that came to me in terms of our conversations was his comment about, we've got more people in prison than we have in college, people that look like us. And that was very disheartening to him. And that's why I think he did mention why he was serving on the Delaware parole system, because he wanted to have an impact on those individuals' lives who came in front of him. And with his very, very frank and clear speaking, to provide some direction if he could. I mean, that's what I recall in terms of those dynamics.
The only thing I might add is, I guess it was 2006 or so, the mayor convened a commission to work on violence in the city. And I served on the chair of the commission for a while. Obviously went to Jim talking about it. And ultimately we came up with a design for a reentry center that is called the Achievement Center. It's a collaborative between what is called the Women's Health Commission and Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, both of whom we're members of. And it is the only one of its kind in the state. And just for context, about 1,200, we only have a population of 70,000 people in Wilmington, about 1,200 ex-offenders come back to our community every year. And they have no services when they come back and no one place to go. It was really at Jim's urging that the Achievement Center was created, and it's up and running and serving lots of folks every day.
Is that a model that you think perhaps can be replicated throughout the country? I mean, as everyone knows, with the sentencing amendments, probably November 1st is when they actually go into effect, and I think nationally we're looking at the possibility of, I think, around 44,000 inmates who are currently in the federal systems having the potential to be released as a result of the changes. And I think your point is absolutely right. Once they're released, what's out there for them? How do you make things available so that they have jobs and they have an ability to support themselves and their families, so that they're not, again, falling into the wrong, situation?
We should talk after this conversation.
Yeah,
There's lots of opportunity.
My husband's a Kappa too, so that's heard you say you're a
Good
Kappa.
Again, I mean, it's what's happening in Delaware is replicated in other places across this country. in terms of this, not only the exodus from our federal system, but the exodus from state systems. And the concern about this recidivism of people and their inability to get traction once they get back in our communities, and those barriers that exist. I mean, those conversations have been going on for much too long. And, I'm optimistic that these initiatives that are taking place now will make a difference. But the jury's still out.
Hey, young lady, I have one
Yes.
question.
Good afternoon. My name is Jocelyn Porter. I'm a JD MBA candidate at Howard University, and I'm also a legal intern in the Office of Fair and Public Practices. Thank you for sharing Mr. Gilliam's legacy. As a person of the younger generation, the millennial generation, can you share some of Mr. Gilliam's thoughts or visions of how young people like myself can become social engineers and have a greater impact on the community?
Yeah, I'll start. I was 30 years old when he asked me to help him run the Urban League. And I think only Jim thought I could do it at the time. And the first thing he wanted to do, this was not at my urging, the first thing he wanted to do was build a young professional organization when we started the Urban League. So his passion for young people and their ability was ever present in everything he did. And it kind of goes back to what I said originally. When he saw you, and Shirley can attest to this, when he saw you clearly had talent and that you were going to be successful, again, whatever endeavor it was, the question wasn't how are you going to be successful in that particular endeavor. The question was always how are you going to routinely, consistently give back as a part of your responsibility to move our people forward. So I don't think his message would change whether it was 15 years ago or today. And that would include things like where you live, which he always thought was important, which is why we lived in the city. And what those images meant, all those kind of things, in addition to what you did for your community in that regard. So think about that as you get out of school and get a big time job maybe. What kind of contributions will you make and use your skills and ability for the betterment of all our people?
And find ways of contributing is always a way to be found. There's no, I don't think Jim ever thought of it as, well, there's a school you can learn this. It's a simple lesson in life. You know that there's a need. You find the need that you can appreciate and you give back. I think that would be something that Jim would definitely advocate.
And just briefly, we saw in the piece where his granddaughter talked about, their commitment to community service, and that's not something they just thought up. They had someone to promote that notion in their minds, and so anytime you have an opportunity to provide a positive influence to your community, I think you go for it. It's like the phrase, if you see something wrong, act on it. And that's the involvement. It does not necessarily have to be a life's work, but it could be another piece of who you are and how you live the rest of your life.
I think as young people like yourselves, when you reflect back to the first Obama elections and you saw that amazing movement by the young people throughout the country, voting and influencing others as to, why they're going to vote for a particular candidate, I think that was a huge change within our country. I mean, I think for most young people, they were like, of course President Obama should win. He's the best qualified. Whereas there were millions of others who were like, well, no, America's probably never going to elect a president of a particular color, etc. But it was the young people who, I think to a large extent, amazing young people who drove the changes in the country. So young people, I think, can do a lot of things with respect to history.
I'm sure Lee wants to wrap up. Thank you. Is that why you're here?
No, I'm here.
Because I have one more thing to say.
No, it's fine. I'm here for when it's time to wrap up.
Oh, okay.
But I'm going to let people talk as long as they want to, because I already warned everyone that when it's time for you to leave for your job duties, please feel free to do so. But I think that this is an important conversation and we should have it.
The only thing, the final thing I wanted to say maybe is, and this came through in both, I think, pieces. You know, Jim was just a kid from the corner, from the streets of Baltimore. It was very clear. Who grew up in a single-parent household. And I think when I opened my remarks, and listened to my piece, I talked about, I didn't even know why he would choose a guy like me, given my own background. It's because it had a lot of similarities to his own background. And that was special to me because even when Jim was talking about the Baltimore League president in the 60s and how he carried himself and how he dressed and all those kind of things, that is why I wanted to be connected to Jim Gilliam, those same things, those exact same things. So when you talk about sort of how you pay it forward, we are always paying it forward. We are always paying it forward. And guess what? Somebody's always watching. So we have to be really thoughtful about our behaviors, our actions, our contributions, and to the extent that we can carry, wherever you come from, whatever your background is, to the extent that we can pay it forward and bring somebody with us, that's what Jim would have wanted. And certainly that was the gift, the great gift he gave to me.
Are there any other questions? If not, then I will wrap it up now. Well, thank you everyone. I'm so glad that you came, and thank you. And I appreciate you taking the time out to join